Good morning, everyone, and fellow Fireonians. Welcome to the Fire Factor Show. This morning, I am speaking. Just quickly, the Fire Factor Show is about phenomenal people doing phenomenal things. And this morning, I have Stanley Watson with me, and we're going to talk data. Now, usually, data is boring. I hate data, but today I'm going to be very vulnerable and talk about, how important data actually is. And I'm going to have Stanley just shine a light on that for us this morning. Thank you for everyone that's watching. Remember that we'd appreciate if you could share this with anybody or create a watch party. Tag someone in the comments if you find something valuable that they could perhaps take away. And we obviously appreciate deeply any feedback. So in your thoughts or questions in the comments is going to be extremely valuable to us. Good morning, Stanley. How are you doing?
Good morning, Ivin. Thank you for having me. I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you doing?
Wonderful. I'm doing phenomenal. I'm always in my element when I'm doing these shows, and I always love. I have high expectations and great anticipation for today because I think I can see that you're very high energy and great personality. So that's going to really help us do a great show today. Let's talk about Stanley Watson. Let's say Stanley is a superhero, especially when it comes to data, etc. And what usually needs to happen is before we can really buy into a superhero person, we need to know their backstory. So take me back to where Stanley got started in all of this. How did you get to this today? How does it relate to your passion, etc.?
Okay, thank you. Great question. So, growing up, high school, I never really knew what I was going to study, and I actually do think it's quite hectic that there's this requirement on those young people to know what they're going to study, like at 18 or 17.
Impossible.
Regardless, I went ahead. I studied BCom, and straight after BCom, I did an MBA. But general business consulting, I guess, wasn't really my thing. I realized quite soon corporate world is not for me. The typical corporate world, being in a typical bureaucratic, big corporate. No offense to anybody who wants to do it or isn't it. You get good companies, but I needed a bit more flexibility and freedom. But I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had a passion for tech and computers, but normal like programming and IT hardware stuff didn't appeal to me. So I was at a loss. So I worked in the family business doing general admin things. But then smartphones came around, the iPhone, the Galaxy S1, the S2. And I was like, okay, I love tech. I'm going to show people how to use their phones. It started as like a sideline hobby, started charging for it, and then snowballed. I got more referrals, and just grew from there. But this is many years ago. This is like 7-8 years ago. And soon realized just the power of collaborative tools like Google Sheets, Google Drive, sharing, task management tools. We can see each other's stuff, calendar sharing, that people weren't using, especially businesses. And I eventually migrated into doing work for businesses. And one of the businesses, I remember, one of my earliest clients, they asked me, we need this inventory control system. I was like, no, heck, this is way above I can't, sorry. But they liked me, they wanted to work with me. They said, no, you are going to try to do this. You are going to do it. So I was like, okay, fine, let me try. It took me like 2 months or so, something, but I figured it out. And it was a complicated system. It was based off a bill of materials. So they make end product, it must subtract raw materials automatically, that type of thing. And it works. And they're still using it to this day, even though my skills have much improved since 6 years ago. And that's my first foray into Google Sheets and data. So I think that gives you, that's a short version of it.
Cool. Okay. So I'm torn between starting to talk about data and then the tools. What do you think comes first? Obviously, I think the data comes first, right?
Good question. So this is exactly it. So with data, all businesses work with data. Whether you're small, doesn't matter what industry you're in. And often there are tools that try to shoehorn you into their way of working. maybe most of them work, but almost never you'll get exactly 100% of what you need. And that's okay. Some of them work brilliantly, not bashing them. But yes, you're saying data comes first, and that's actually my personal approach, because with spreadsheets, I'm actually like, spreadsheets is my jam. You can customize it to the way you work, your business, your data. We're not going to shoehorn you into a hole, like a round peg into a square hole, whatever it is, maybe. We make it work for you and your workflow. So data comes first. Looking at your business, the way your business works, what you want to achieve, and yes, the data that comes from it. So great question. Yeah.
So I think let's talk about data for a moment. Data is super important when you look at sales, when you look at business management. I know there is an approach to accounting. I think it's management accounting. They look at the data and then they run their business according to that. Yes. When you're looking at your your creatives working with the ads on Facebook, for instance, Facebook ads, you're working with data there, etc., etc. So maybe I want to ask, what kind of data do you work with? Is it mostly the business metrics? Do you work with ad data? Do you work with industry data? What kind of data do you work with day to day?
Great question. I can work with all of those you mentioned. The ones I work with most is operational data inside the business. For instance, I have a few construction clients. They don't want to use necessarily the construction tools that are out there, like Microsoft Projects, etc., which is very expensive, and also that will shoehorn you into using that system. So it's basically tracking the project from beginning to end. So all the steps in the project, what data needs to be done, automatic Gantt charts, and they can share it with clients or suppliers live. So that's a type of data. So it's operational data, but also sales data. So it's not accounting, but it's sales, tracking the lead from beginning to end. So there's a cold lead, or there's a qualified lead, or you've made contact, you sent the quote, that they've accepted it. But like just every single lead, and who needs to do what by when. It's live, everybody can access it at the same time, and automatic dashboards. So management can just go in and see what's the stats. They can do it from their phones. It's like real time. So it's sales, and operational data. That's the type of data I work with the most. And like I mentioned earlier, like also this probably counts as operational data, but like inventory stuff, yes, and HR type stuff, like wage hour tracking, like how long have your wage workers worked for a given week. So yeah, I think that answers your question.
It does, yeah. I think the most common kind of quote that we can adapt here is, you can't manage what you don't measure. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that and the importance of, and tell us a little bit, where does it start? Obviously, like let's say, for instance, in my world, I need to collect data, and I need to have some way to get data into kind of my world, so that I can actually work with that data. So I think maybe speak to the management of data, and then also speak to how do I capture the data? So we know lead forms, we know CS, customer management systems, etc. I'm going to disappear out the frame for a second, so don't be alarmed for those that's watching. Stanley's going to walk you through how to, where do I get data streams from, and then speaking to that adage of how do I actually, the fact that you can't manage your business if you don't have data. Over to you, Stanley. I'm going to be out of the frame for a minute or so. Okay.
All right, perfect. No worries.
Thank
you, Ivin.
Thank you. Okay.
Great question. So you can get your data from a few sources. More often than not, you get manual data entry. So your staff needs to see what's happening on the floor, literally, and they go and just type, choose the date, this thing, this thing, this thing. Like, what's the status? Sometimes it's just like 5 or 6 cells to enter or fields directly into the spreadsheet, for instance, the live Google Sheet. And then we can run automatic reports from all of that data that's being captured. So one should not discount the manual data entry that one does get. Obviously, it depends on the type of work. So for in a factory or on the production floor, it's often manual data entry. You can also remove people from the having direct access to the system, to the spreadsheet or whatever it is, by using forms like Google Forms. So with a Google form, you send out a link to people, or you email it to them, or you embed it in a website, which is pretty cool. And either your staff, if it's a staff thing, or external people like prospective clients can fill in the Google form. And they fill in the Google form. You ask all the questions. It can be multiple choice, it can be text, paragraph, multi-select, matrix-based questions. It's pretty cool. And once I click on submit, it will automatically populate your spreadsheet for you. Now you can then just use that automatic data that's captured. It can be like many columns of data, many fields of data. And you can even add on manually to that same spreadsheet. And then you can, of course, run automatic reports based on that. So forms is a great idea. But what if you don't want to use Google Forms? So why won't one want to use Google Forms? So let's say you have a lead form on your website, for instance. You don't like the way Google Form embeds into website, maybe because you're quite kind of limited by how you can make it look and fit in. You also get email scrapers that can automatically populate your database or your Google Sheets. So what's an email scraper? It basically looks, let's say somebody fills in the form on your website, name, surname, what they want, how many people, whatever the case may be. They click on submit. You get a standard email with the standard fields. That's how most WordPress form plugins work. The data comes through to you in a standardized format, and then the email scraper will look at that format and just populate your spreadsheet for you. So that's another cool way in which data can come in, is from forms, whether it's a link that you send out or just embedded on your website, whether it's a Google form or another form, it doesn't matter. We can get that data. So you didn't even then fill it in manually. Your clients did it for you, or your staff did it for you. So that's pretty cool. And yet another way to get data in is if the website or source of data has an API, a documented API. So your Google Sheet can talk to the program or the service, the web service, and automatically in real time just subtract or extract the data. This can be anything, but the most common example I can give to you is Google Ads. Like you get Google Analytics, which actually does all your analytics automatically. But let's say you want to run like more advanced analytics on that. Google Sheets can pull that data in automatically, just real-time updates, and it's flipping cool. So, so that's yet another way. It's via API, and it's really smart ways to collect your data. Now, speaking to the question of you can't manage what you can't measure. just that everything just comes down to this. I think if I wish I had AJ's knack for putting words to why things are important, because I just listen to him and he's brilliant. But I'm going to attempt to say why this is important in business. If you don't know what's going on, how can you improve on it? You just see maybe money coming into the bank and out, or your cash flow is so low, you don't have money to spend on anything. You don't know where the problem lies. But that's why you need to track things from beginning to end. But make it easy on yourself. Have the system do it for you as much as possible, as much automation as you can, so you can make those smart decisions. How are your ratios? You need to maybe track a certain gross profits ratio that you want to maintain, or net profit ratio, or some other stock level ratio, debt ratios, to know that you're on track. Also, if you don't measure your stuff correctly, you might not, investors may not want to invest in your business or lend you money if you maybe need it. It doesn't just come down to financial accounting. It comes down to the managerial accounting, like the operational stats and ratios. But we at FIRE, we will help you with this. I help you with this. The business consultants will help you with this. We have got financial experts. We all work together, and that's why we're such a cool team, a superhero team.
I wanna quickly talk about. You were just talking about the collecting of data. Now you can pull in your data from, for instance, a CSV file, for instance, just an example, or you could do it manually. Now, obviously, it's better to draw it in from CSV than doing it manually. And then obviously that CSV file can come from the different sources that you've just explained, etc. But obviously to do it as automated as you possibly can.
Yes.
So once you have, and you're looking at it, obviously how it's presented is important for the business or for you, in terms of I need to see the most data, and then I can go delve deeper into kind of the things that I need available. When you personally collect and work with data, where do you spend most of your time? And there is kind of what's required of you, like it's important that you spend time in this space, and then there's the space where you have fun reading data, because that's how I position this talk of ours, is actually having fun. Where do you have the most fun? How do you read it? What kind of data do you like reading, and where's your strengths?
Okay, great question. I actually, the part that I have the most fun with is also the part that gives me the most stress. It's a part of conceptualizing the way that we're going to lay out the data or capture it, and the way it's going to interact with each other. Actually, once I've got that figured out, then building the dashboard or the reports, that's fun. That's a lot of fun too. But that's like easy. That's like, I mean, don't tell clients, it's very hard. Okay, but that's actually not so bad. But it's conceptualizing, okay, this is the way you guys have to marry the way the client works currently with how we're going to capture the data and how they're going to relate to each other and what's going to be pulled through automatically and what can't. That actually takes so much time, and it gives me so much stress sometimes, but it's also the most satisfying when I figure it out. It feels like a little victory, and I feel like a boss, like a champion. Awesome. But sometimes the end product doesn't look that complicated, but you have to figure it out. It's like a plumber looking at a complicated solution, but at the end it doesn't look that much different. What did he do? What did he fix? But he don't realize what processes that go through to freaking fix this thing. So that's actually my biggest challenge, but also my greatest fun, is to figure it out.
Like solving the problems.
The concepts, conceptualizing the workflow, how it's going to get set up. But then getting the reports, that's also fun, yes. Making dynamic dashboards. So all that management ever has to do is basically change the date range, and then the rest is automatic. They can see the stats for that date range, but they tell me what they want to see. They give me their metrics that they'd like to see, but I also suggest ones to them, because I can look at the data, I understand the data by that time, and I can see, these are maybe the ratios you want to have a look at. Yes, and how's each division performing? Who's the best salesperson? Who needs a bit of help, etc. Yeah, I hope that does I speak to your question?
Definitely, okay, cool. Let's talk about the interfaces that we were talking about, what data to put where, those interfaces and the dashboards that's being designed. How much of the industry provides you with the right tools to read and have the right dashboards, and how much customization are you doing in terms of working with developers, for instance, like Steven, just to make sure that that tool works best with what you need to do?
So the cool thing with well, let me start with this. My preferred tool to work with, and it's very simple, is spreadsheets, Google Sheets, Excel. It's because you have perfect control over how data is presented and and how you make it work. It's perfectly customizable, 100%, and it's actually relatively simple. So that's my preferred tool, and this is very useful for small to medium business or divisions in big business. It works really good. In terms of other tools, if you start working with bigger sets of data, I do also work with a tool called Google Data Studio. It's actually a free tool that anybody can go and use if you know how to use it. And it's also the equivalent of Microsoft Power BI, which Power Business Intelligence, which is also a free tool.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool that we have these tools available to us. So depending on your data sets and your data source and how people can access it or should access it, you choose which platform. But my line of work, my preferred clients currently, I'm just such a fan of Google Sheets, to be honest. But those other places are available to you. In terms of setting up like data visualization and other tools, I'm starting to work with Stephen on FIO's internal CRM tool. I mean, it's early stages with my involvement, like I have barely done anything. But when it comes to presenting stats and so on, Stephen has asked that him and I work on it a little bit together. So yeah, it's just thinking about the ways you're going to present your data, what's important to the client, to the end user. So I guess you can't just always just think it out by your own. You need to actually speak to the clients, hear what their pain points are, what they're struggling with, what's important to them, and use your bit of your business acumen that you built up, your experience, and even talk to the other business consultants in FIO and figure out what will be important. Yeah.
I guess one of the big things in your industry and your field is data protection. Do you want to speak to us a little bit about, let's say, obviously, what happens when a client comes to you and you need to work with the data and the data is handed over to you? I had a big organization in August that I was entrusted with their data. It's mostly contacts, etc. So what is the process? What is the correct process? And I want us to speak to here on our side, on what do we have in place to protect, the process of handing data to us, and how do we protect the data in-house, and advice to the customer, even if they don't work with us, how to protect their data, because that's a big, big, big thing at the moment.
Really good question. And even though I do regard myself as relatively knowledgeable on the subject, I'm not going to say I'm an absolute expert on it. But I do have really good ideas and ideas that I implement myself and so forth. So I think first thing is we do have at FIO, and in any business, it's good to sign a non-disclosure agreement with your client. Even if they don't ask for it, offer it, so they can just know, oh wow, these guys are on top of their game. They're committing to a non-disclosure agreement, so they have that legal sense of security with you. So at least from a legal perspective, they feel safe and they can continue on with you. So that's the first step. But what happens thereafter? Cool. So when I set up clients on the systems with Google Workspace, especially, and Google Sheets, I really recommend that they set up good two-factor authentication rules. So when anyone needs to log into data or into an account for the first time on a device, it will send a one-time PIN to your phone, or you need to use Google Authenticator to log in. This really just ensures that the right people get access to the data. So it's not just password, it's a second step of authentication. And that should actually be good enough for most people. That will cover most bases. But that's not really good enough. So you want to make sure that data, the right people have access to it. So sometimes when setting up your sharing permissions, so the simplest way of thinking about this is in Google Drive, you've got your folders or your shared drives. just to go and periodically check who has access to what level of access do they have. That's one thing. To dive even deeper into this, sometimes, let's say a client, he or she needs to have he doesn't want his team members to necessarily see the financial stats. We have ways of letting different spreadsheets with different sharing permissions talk to each other. So maybe the client, the staff can see all of this, but this sheet, but they can't see all of this, where the stats are analyzed, and where management can put in extra financial figures, etc. So there are a few aspects to look at. And of course, a very important aspect to look at is the whole POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act. We want to comply with that. So both Microsoft and Google, with Google Workspace, you can set the way your data is processed. So I think I may be veering off from the question a little bit, but it's related.
No, that's perfect. Yes.
So when you set in the admin console, or basically you just speak to us IT guys, we will set that the information is processed in such a way that it complies with POPI. And it will automatically actually comply with European standards for data protection. So I think POPI may be, look, I'm not an expert on it, but it's the European standards are slightly more strict. So if you comply with the European standards, you automatically comply with POPI. But that's just the way I understand it. I could be wrong, but regardless, you will be compliant with POPI. And yes, and then of course you get local, like at the client's offices and on their machines, their endpoints, you get lots of tools and devices to make sure it's secure. But that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'm not a hardware or networking specialist. But that's also why I love Google so much, like Google Workspace especially, because you work directly in the cloud, directly through your browser. The data is actually not on your machine; it's in the cloud. If something should happen, and you just, let's say the device gets compromised or whatever, we change the password, we change the login tokens, and all data is removed. So I'm such a big fan for Google Workspace, and I'm actually an evangelist for it. So I want all people to just use it. But Microsoft is also good. I'm not bashing it, but I just love Google. And I feel you can actually be more safe. Yeah.
That's wonderful. One of the values here at Fire is it doesn't matter what size your company is or your income or revenue. If you are a small company, we like only giving you or selling you what you need at that moment so that you can grow. And obviously, because of the relationship, we can grow with you. Now, but the reason I said that is I want to know when would Stanley Watson come into a project and what would he do? And what is the engagement with the client like?
Okay, brilliant. So far with Fire, when I get to a client is when the business consultant brings me in to see the client. The business consultant knows the client's needs best because they look at the entire business. It's not just me and data and systems. But invariably and eventually, you're going to need, the client's going to need a system which start to automate processes. When you systemize your business processes, you're taking it away from like the client's brain, the IP sitting in the brain, and putting it into the business, which actually helps, number one, scale the business so the business can grow much quicker. Because the client doesn't have to be involved day in and day out. And the client can then start also relaxing a little bit, or not relax, like sit back necessarily, but not be as involved in the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day operations, so they can start working on the business, getting more business leads, growing the business, or going on vacation with their family. So that's why systemizing a business is very important. But usually it's the business consultants that will bring me in and say, tell the client, look, we recommend that you start systemizing this process. You need it to save up time, be efficient, reduce errors, reduce costs, etc. That's the most direct answer. But also, there's a lot of word of mouth referrals. Before joining FIO, that's been like 95% of my business. It's just word of mouth referrals. I didn't do any marketing. I should have, but I didn't. But I've joined FIO because FIO is going to help me with that. We're going to help each other. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Maybe we can end off with this specific. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the owner of the business. What advice do you have for him, especially when you're a growing company? You were like an in-man sock at first, and then you start getting staff on board, etc. And let's not talk about access to accounts and that. Let's talk more about data. Who do you trust with what data, and what levels do you suggest they should have in terms of access?
I love the question. So usually with a growing business where the founder owner was very involved in the day-to-day running, in my experience, it's tough for them to let go of control, to delegate, to make things open. Generally speaking, and I think this goes for more than just with data, but the more you give to your staff, your team, they're team members, the more you allow them to work with, the better they are. The more efficiency, the more creativity, because they've got more knowledge, they've got more control and power, they feel empowered, and they can do their work. So I rather fault in giving too much information. That's I think also congruent with my personality. I'm very open. It might not always be the best. So I kind of look at what the client's personality and what they're ready for. So I do look at the process. I advise them and the business consultant at FIO what processes they can automate and what's recommended to automate. And then it's time to give team members access to what they need to log in, what they need to see in order to make their own decisions quicker. The team member could, on the floor, can maybe look at the data and see, okay, we're going to run into a problem. We need to order more stock or whatever it may be. So giving them that power is such a good thing. So yeah, give them as much access as humanly possible. And I just want to add on to that. I see bigger corporates, they're very, probably for good security reasons, but I see their IT policies are so restrictive. They can't visit Google to maybe check how to do something. That just goes against my whole philosophy of the way things should work.
Counterintuitive, yeah.
Yeah.
Danny,
yes, exactly.
I think both those things that you mentioned, in terms of having your staff work with certain things in your business, and that thing about accessing Google. I mean, for me, that should be a basic human right.
Yes.
It's all about. I think at the end of the day, it comes to trust. It's in all those spheres. It's about everywhere that I work in organizations and building teams, etc. It's important that you give trust first, because that's when the business and relationships flourish, instead of saying, okay, you need to do this, but I'm going to restrict that because I don't trust you with it. That's what what restrictions basically say. And if you go and look for a video on YouTube called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey, he does an analogy of I think it's a hot dog stand in New York, where he realized that he couldn't do as much turnover or sell as many hot dogs as he could or had the potential to, because he was stuck with changing change for his clients. So what he did is he put a bowl with change on top of the kind of cart, and he was just dishing out. And so when people wanted to pay, he said, make your own change. And just because of that, giving trust and putting it in the client's hands, and obviously applying the example to your staff, your business becomes more efficient. Wow. And that was a very awesome lesson for me to learn.
I love that. I love it so much.
It's amazing. Let's end off with, do you want to give us, if you could give everybody watching, clients, fellow Fionians, etc., one big valuable tip from Stanley or your department, what would that be?
I would say, do not be afraid of spreadsheets. Okay, it's the most boring thing that you thought was boring growing up. It's not. Have a look at it. Look at the data. It's simple tools, really simple. See what's happening in your business, and or in your division. I guess that's it. That's pretty much it.
Actually, I forgot to ask this question. How do you have fun with data? You already spoke a little bit about when you get excited when you read certain data and that kind of thing. When is it? Just empower the listener by telling them how you have fun with data. You were talking about when you are finding solutions or those kind of things. When is data fun for you? And I know it's fun for you every day, but I'm talking about when you're really elated or excited because data brought something to your environment.
Yes. So yeah, I think I have an answer. It's I just need to put words to it, okay?
Go for it.
Data is not just like reams of numbers. For me, data is it's actually not the reams of numbers. It's the type of data that you put in. So if you think of it in a spreadsheet, it's not this, but it's the columns, the type of data. So let's say the date or the type of clients, the status of the job, that type of thing. Because when you look at the types of data that there are that you can put in and how they relate to each other, then your world starts opening up because you can see what's happening. It doesn't actually matter like if you've got 1 million data or 100 rows of data. It's for Yoda, that's exactly this. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's not the size. If you think of that scene in Star Wars where Luke Skywalker lifting a rock or lifting a spaceship, that it should be the same using the Force. Same thing with data. It doesn't matter. It's actually the types of data and how they relate to each other, and then your eyes start opening up. So just think about the types of data in your business or in your process, and how they relate to each other, and what you'd want them to be like. It's actually like that's how you want to run your business. It will tell you what you need to look at. So that's the one thing. But and I actually want to get back to previous points. But if you had to follow on question on this, I want you to ask that question. Oh, cool. So also, just now we spoke about trust. So this is actually not directly related to data, but yes, I found that when clients have trust with you and you trust them, maybe that's actually my biggest tip. So build that trust and rapport with a client or with a person first. I think people want to do business with the person, not necessarily so much the service. Yeah, that's when I have the most fun. I can just see when I go on business meetings with AJ, for instance. I know I'm speaking a lot about AJ, but just the trust that he inspires with his clients, just from the knowledge and the wisdom, the business wisdom that he has, but just his whole manner, and you can just see people trust him, and I trust him, and that's actually why that's my first thing that got me into FIO. So I think my biggest tip is being a person of integrity and inspiring trust with who you are, but of course then your expertise does come into play.
One of the successes of yours, let's say for instance your Google Sheet, is the formatting and the sums and the fractions and all those kind of things that you work into there. How good are you with that? How deep can you go? And how much does a person, just a normal person that works with a sheet, how much of that should they know, and where can they learn more on how to make that more efficient?
Cool. So multiple answers to this, and all of it's true. Sometimes the only thing that I'm doing better than the next person, I'm calling myself a data expert and a data specialist, but actually I'm just really good at Googling. Okay, so because spreadsheets is such a widely used tool, there's literally an answer to the most particular question you may have. So go ahead and look. Okay, so sometimes the answers come and they require some cross-functional knowledge with other formulas and skills. But if you just keep at it, you can learn a lot, okay? Me, myself, I'm pretty good at formulas. I love my formulas and my logic. So I've had formulas that, at the top of Excel or the top of Google Sheets, you've got your formula bar. I've had formulas that run like 6 rows deep for one formula. Formula, okay?
Crazy.
So that's one thing. But also with Google Sheets and Excel, you get scripts. So with Excel, it's VBA scripts, and Google, it's Google scripts. I'm not an expert in that, but I work very closely with strategic partners who are good at it. But I do also make use of third-party scripts to do what we need to do. If the function or the integration with another service is not available directly within Google Sheets. And I guess the last points I want to lay out on this, in terms of advice for the layperson, is the way you lay out your data. If you do just what's called like a database format, but basically you want to have a column. Let's say there should be the date, the client, the type of value. Just have like one row at the top that you can freeze. You can freeze the top row, and that's how you label everything. Don't like break up your data into sections as you go down, because then you can't summarize your data. So just have like columns going from left to right with each value, and then each row representing one line item or one job or whatever it may be. And so that's a very salient way of describing how the best way of laying out your data.
That's awesome. Stanley, It's been very, very interesting speaking to you. I don't think there's like a fellowship or a brotherhood of people that work with data. So, this has been very interesting for me because, sitting, these are discussions that I like to have when I'm around the braai, but unfortunately we don't find interesting people like you around the braai. And I just said just 100% agree in the comments. Thanks for watching, AJ, and your support there. So Stanley, it was a very interesting conversation for me. Because I'm learning to use data more and being better at it, and the functionality and the importance of that in making a success of a business or a department, etc. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future, because I think the discussion today has really opened up my eyes to a lot of possibilities, etc. And I think anybody, people just starting out in business, or you're a great business person, I think you need to embrace data. Like you said, it could be boring, it could be Greek to some people, but it's important that we have that in our businesses and start working it to make our success. Thank you so much for your time, and have a phenomenal weekend.
Same to you, Ivin. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I want to say bye to everybody.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Everyone that's doing this at the end, feel welcome to ask questions afterwards. We'll make sure that Stanley answers that. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week at 10 o'clock.